Welcome to Aspire, and I Have the Right To podcast, where we amplify voices, share stories, and drive change in the fight against sexual assault. We explore the critical issues surrounding student safety, institutional accountability, and survivor empowerment. In every episode, our goal is to provide insightful conversations with survivors, experts, educators, and advocates, giving you, our listener, valuable information, resources, and actionable steps to create safer environments and cultivate a culture of respect and consent.
Welcome back to the Aspire podcast. I'm Chessy, Prout, co-founder of I Have the Right To, and I'm here with my co-host and executive director, Katie Shipp. Aspire was created by the nonprofit I Have the Right To as a space for honest, meaningful conversations about survivor advocacy, prevention, and what it truly takes to create safer communities. If these conversations resonate with you and you're interested in bringing them into your school or community, we'd love to connect. I Have the Right To partners with K-12 schools, colleges, and universities to provide age-appropriate programming for students, educators, and parents on consent, healthy relationships, digital safety, leadership, and more, helping turn these conversations into action. You can reach us at takeaction@ihavetheright2.org. Now, before we jump into our conversation with today's guest, I want to take a moment to introduce I Have the Right To College intern and facilitator, Jonas Wall. Jonas is a student at the University of Delaware, and he decided to intern with I Have the Right To because he's passionate about making sure students understand their rights and feel supported if they experience sexual assault. What drew him to this work is our focus on education and conversation, not just responding after harm occurs. Welcome, Jonas.
Thank you, Chessy. I'm so happy to be here.
We are so happy to have you with us here today, Jonas, and thanks, Chessy, for introducing us. I am honored today to introduce our guest, my prior law partner and friend, Amy Mathieu. Amy is a trauma-informed attorney whose practice is dedicated to representing survivors of adult sexual abuse, child sexual abuse, and child sexual abuse material, or CSAM. She has successfully pursued justice in cases involving decades-old abuse under revival window laws and approaches every case with a survivor-centered lens that prioritizes safety, empowerment, and healing. Amy also represents employees in employee law matters such as discrimination, sexual harassment, and FMLA issues. While earning her law degree at the University of Pittsburgh, Amy clerked for a federal judge, excelled in advocacy and moot court, and was recognized for her Title IX work with the National Association of Women Lawyers Outstanding Law Student Award and the Order of the Barristers. Today, she brings that courtroom skill and deep compassion to survivors and families who are navigating some of the most traumatic experiences of their lives. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
So can you take us back to what first pulled you towards this work and what made you stay?
Sure. I joke sometimes that I tried every type of law that I didn't want to practice first. I after law school I clerked, which was great. And then I started doing complex commercial litigation. And it certainly pays the bills, but I had no passion for it. So I quickly pivoted to do personal injury law, representing plaintiffs, more like car accidents and slip and fall cases, and realized I wasn't very passionate about that either. However, I really enjoyed having one-on-one conversations and connections with my clients. And so I from that experience, I learned that I really wanted to represent individuals, especially on the plaintiff side, fighting for justice, just not necessarily in that arena of law. And I saw a job posting on Indeed for a job focusing on sex abuse crimes and litigating them in the civil courtroom, and took a leap of faith, and I've been doing it ever since. Even changing law firms, I still represent the same clients I did before, and I don't see myself leaving this area of law anytime soon.
So, Amy, when a survivor first contacts you, they're often carrying years of silence or fear or shame. Can you share with our audience what those conversations might look like on your end? What sort of training or trauma-informed techniques do you use in those first conversations to help survivors feel like they can share their stories and pursue justice in a way that feels okay to them?
Sure. I would say a lot of the clients that I represent, I come to know them through an organization like Pittsburgh Action Against Rape or PCAR. And so a lot of times my first step is during our initial call, I'll set up a Zoom or we'll meet in person and I will make sure that their advocate is there with me during that intake. And so I understand I'm a stranger that I'm asking them to divulge deep dark secrets to, right? And so trying to adjust that comfort level is really helpful, and having someone who they're already familiar with and trust in the room makes a huge difference. The other thing is during our first conversation, I don't ask many questions. I let them tell me what they're comfortable with, and then I'll follow up, a week later with maybe more in-depth questions, or I'll ask them if they're more comfortable if I send them in writing and they can go through them with a trusted family member or therapist to answer them, rather than putting them on the spot and asking them to disclose a deeply personal story to me when I haven't gained that trust yet. I haven't earned that trust yet with them. So that's the first advice I would give to having these conversations. The other thing that I'm very careful about is distinguishing their experience with me versus their experience in a criminal court. Because a lot of times when I'm having these conversations, these survivors have already been burned by the court system in one way or another. And so a lot of times they're coming to me after, a DA hasn't followed up with them, a detective hasn't followed up with them, or the DA said, we're not going to pursue your case because it's a he said, she said, right? They've already had some sort of traumatizing experience that's connected to the court system. So my goal in that first interview is to explain to them the difference between the criminal and the civil. In the criminal, they don't have anyone who represents them. They have a DA that represents the state's interests, and they have a defense attorney that represents the defendant. No one is there for them in that courtroom. And so to me, it's important for me to establish with them in a civil courtroom, I am there for you. I am only interested in your best interest. I am not there to represent anyone else or anyone else's interests. And so the experience is vastly different than in a criminal courtroom. And again, it's establishing that trust not only in me, but in the system I'm asking them to enter into.
It is it strange that it warms my heart that you talk about that both the not asking probing questions and also educating the potential clients and people that come in, because it's so important that consent and sexual assault takes away so much power and control from the survivors. And oftentimes in a lot of civil and criminal legal matters, well, especially criminal legal matters, that power and control is not given back to the survivors. Like you said, we're just, I was the state's witness against my perpetrator. I was just the primary witness of the crime that was committed against me. So I think it's incredible, the education piece that you do. And I think not only victims need that, but also the public. There's so much misconception when it comes to both criminal and civil legal battles. And a lot of the time, I think we all sort of need this trauma-informed, victim-centered education, regardless of our experiences. So thank you for doing your part in making this a safer space for victims to come forward and get some semblance of justice.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think, it's taken years to kind of myself learn how to do this in a way that makes sense to me and also yields good results for clients. And that's the other thing is a lot of that first conversation and many of the conversations after that are establishing that they are the ones in control in the civil litigation. I am a facilitator, I am an advocate, but at the end of the day, every single step we take is their decision. And if at any point they say, this isn't good for me anymore, right? This is not good for my mental health. I don't feel like I am safe to continue. That's it. We're done, right? And so, making sure that they understand that they are the one in control of all decision making throughout the case is also a really important part of my practice.
That's a really amazing approach. And you also have experience bringing claims for child sexual abuse that happened many years, even decades ago. So, for survivors listening in who think it's been too long, what would you want them to know about why it still matters to come forward, even on their own timeline?
Yeah, so from a legal perspective, it depends on what state you're in. Unfortunately, I practiced decades-old cases when I was practicing in New York, and they opened a 2-year statute of limitations window where any survivor, regardless of when it happened, if they were abused under the age of 18, they had 2 years to file a civil case. That type of law has been pending in Pennsylvania for years now and continues to be pending and held up by legislatures, unfortunately. But some states have eliminated their statute of limitations altogether when it comes to these types of cases. So it largely depends on your geographic location as to what rights you have. But I still think, regardless of whether you have a legal claim you can bring, I still think it's very important for survivors to come forward, and I know it's a very scary and intimidating process, but something that happens all the time is kind of this cascade effect of survivors coming forward. It's largely similar to the Me Too movement of when one person comes forward, it gives their power to other survivors, and I think that recognizing and pointing out where the perpetrators are is just as important as any other part of the process. Because if the public knows that there's a perpetrator at this school or at this YMCA or at this camp, then they know how to protect their kids better. And I think that's a really important part of survivors being willing to share their intimate story.
When we were working those cases together, also, there were so many cases where somebody came forward thinking they were the only one. And then, months later, there's suddenly hundreds of survivors who had the same abuser. For example, the same perpetrator. For example, one of the cases Amy and I worked on, there was a perpetrator within a hospital that was there for 4 decades, abusing children. And so when one person came forward, others realized they weren't alone and they came forward as well. That really leans into the next question that I wanted to ask you, Amy. When we were working on those cases together, especially, the ones with people later in life and then, people who are younger, I kept coming back to the need for education as a preventative tool for sexual assault. And a core part of our programming at I Have the Right To is educating young people, parents, and educators on consent, healthy relationships, and digital boundaries. From your point of view, why are these conversations not just nice to have, but essential tools in changing the conditions that allow abuse to happen?
Yeah, I think my answer is probably twofold there. I think one, I think probably everyone on this call agrees that a lot of times when we talk about sexual assault prevention, we put the onus on the victim to prevent it. And that is incredibly harmful for many, many reasons. But the first of which being, it is never your job to prevent yourself from being assaulted. And it is never your fault when it happens, no matter what the circumstances are, no matter what you were wearing, how many drinks you had, any of those things, it does not matter. There is nothing you can do that gives someone consent to assault you. And so I think focusing our education on the other side of that, of how do we teach kids to not assault each other? How do we teach kids how to report assaulting when it does happen very early on so that it doesn't escalate? Um, those are the only ways we can actually change the fabric of our society. And, I think the other part of that is I represent many children. Sitting here today, and a lot of times they simply don't have the vocabulary necessary to talk to an adult about what is happening. And so, when you have parents who maybe believe in celibacy or believe, that we shouldn't teach kids about sex at all, right? What you're doing is you're taking away the ability for your child to speak openly to you about abuse. And so I can't agree more with your guys' mission and the need to go to the root of the problem, because if we don't fix it early on and we don't change society's view of how we prevent assault, then we're not ever going to make any progress.
100%. Parents think that they're protecting their children by not having the conversation when actually they're making it more dangerous for them. And I think what you just said, Amy, highlights another part of what we do, where we talk with parents and educators as well, because how many cases did we have where somebody said, I knew what happened to me was wrong, but I also knew the adults in the room wouldn't listen to me. And so it's also important, just as important, to have the conversations with the adults in the room as well as the students so that everybody understands and everybody can pay attention, hopefully to prevent it from happening. But even when it does happen, so that survivor immediately has support. Amy, so you were recently featured in the Pittsburgh area news regarding a case you're working on involving serious harm and exploitation among high school students, particularly highlighting the risk of online exploitation. Can you share a bit about that case and, more importantly, what parents and educators should take away from it? And what do you think young people need to most understand right now?
Yeah, that's a horrific factual case. A senior in high school decided to catfish his other students at the school, his peers, and using a fake profile, and sent them pictures using a fake profile to lure them to send pictures back. And he ended up collecting, um, you know, pictures of, I don't know the exact number, but in the 10s to 20s, pictures of students at the school, and then use them as blackmail to extort them for money, to send more pictures, to send more vulgar pictures, to send videos. And then we believe, this hasn't been confirmed yet, he sold those images and videos on the black market for a profit. And this is an 18-year-old kid. Um, and so it's devastating, it's alarming to think that a perpetrator could be that young. We don't know if, he was influenced by any other adults, to perpetrate these crimes, but he is facing, felonies in state court right now as an adult, and he's awaiting, his plea right now. So that's where we are in the criminal case. I represent one of the survivors, um, who was photographed in a locker room at school. So one of the things that this perpetrator did was he coerced another kid using the blackmail of his photos, to set up a camera in the boys' locker room and record the wrestling team, um, as they were changing.
Amy, correct me if I'm wrong, but the perpetrator actually pretended to be somebody else, right? He concealed his identity and pretended to be somebody else to lure the other kids in, right?
Yeah, so he pretended to be an a woman in her 20s, and used, pornographic images of her that he found online.
And one of the things when we talk to kids, especially about this particular risk, is a lot of times perpetrators will say, okay, if you just send me this video, then I'll leave you alone. If you just send me this photo, then I'll leave you alone. But it really never stops. And so what we try to tell young people is don't believe that, because it just gives them more material and more power, and that it's really important to speak up, and that these people know what they're doing and they will trap you in it and use threats to continue to manipulate you, that it happens more commonly than we think, and that it's really important to speak up quickly. Any advice you'd want to share that there with your experience, Amy, for any young people who might be listening?
Yeah, and I mean, look, I can envision myself being a 16-year-old, 17-year-old, and having someone send me a threat like that they're going to release my pictures to the world or my friends or my family, and I can feel my face getting red with that kind of embarrassment and shame that comes with that experience. And so I get it. It's a scary position to be in, and it's one that you didn't put yourself in willingly. You were tricked, and you were lured in with false sentiments. And so I get it. However, continuing down that road is only going to make things worse. Once if they are threatening to release one photo of you, imagine what they're going to do with the video of you. It's a never-ending negotiation. And so I think alerting, if you're not comfortable telling your parents, tell a teacher, tell a guidance counselor, tell a therapist, tell the police, right? I mean, there are other ways, even a trusted friend, right? A trusted adult. There are other ways, and you're only going to dig yourself a deeper hole if you try to reason with someone who is trying to extort you.
And speaking of recent cases, you recently secured a win at the appellate level in Pennsylvania involving a public school liability for sexual abuse. Can you walk us through the background of that case and why this decision was so impactful?
Yeah, absolutely. So in Pennsylvania and many other states, but I don't know the laws of every state. In Pennsylvania, there's something called sovereign immunity. And the premise of that is that the government has immunity from lawsuits for many, many different things. In fact, they have immunity from lawsuits from every form of negligence unless it is on a list of exceptions. And so, one of those exceptions, and the most recently passed exception in Pennsylvania, is child sex abuse. And so, what that means is that you now have the right to sue a public school for child sex abuse if it occurred because of the school's behavior. And so, for a while, it was unclear whether you could sue schools for peer-on-peer abuse or only teacher on student abuse. And so I filed a lawsuit against a public school, and it was one of the first after this exception passed in Pennsylvania. Um, the school did argue that they were immune from suit because it was peer-on-peer abuse. I won at the trial court level. They appealed it to the Commonwealth Court, and I won at the Commonwealth Court on appeal. And so now, moving forward, as of right now, you can sue schools for child sex abuse cases in Pennsylvania under that exception. There is a case pending with the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. A similar fact pattern happened in Philadelphia, and the school argued for immunity, and they also lost at the Commonwealth Court, and they have appealed it to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. So that is still pending. It could change, but right now the law of the land is that you can sue public schools for child sex abuse, even if it is peer on peer, if you can show the school was negligent and caused the abuse to, or allowed the abuse to happen. And that's incredibly important. It holds public schools to the same standard that we hold private schools and private organizations and nonprofit organizations, which is you have a duty to protect children from foreseeable harm, which includes sex abuse, when it is perpetrated on their premises.
That legal work that you're doing is so important, especially as a survivor who's experienced so much institutional harm. I think that sexual assault doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's not just one person does one action against one person. It's something that affects whole communities, families, school systems, organizations, and so you know all of us are dealing with the impacts of that on our school communities, in our communities. So for child survivors and their families that are interacting with these systems where the harm occurs, whether it be a court system, schools, law enforcement, all of that can be deeply re-traumatizing to have to face how their institutions have failed them in the face of that trauma. From your experience, are there any concrete changes that these systems can make, besides this sort of, change in the law in Pennsylvania? But what about at the institutional level at these schools, that can make them become more trauma informed and survivor friendly?
Yeah, great question. I wish I had an answer to snap my fingers and fix how institutions deal with reports of sex abuse. I will say that there are two commonalities I find with institutions that seem to experience high levels of abuse. Um, the first is a hierarchical system. I think the more collaborative systems are, the more team oriented they are, and there's not one person at the top making all of the decisions, I think less likely that these things happen in the first place, and less likely that you're going to run into institutional barriers in trying to get to the bottom of what happened. The second thing is secrecy. And that comes into huge when it comes to the Catholic Church, right? I think that the more team oriented, less hierarchical you are, and the more transparent you are as an organization, the better you are going to be at preventing the harm from occurring, but then also be investigating it and holding people accountable for it. And so those are the two things that I would advise that schools, churches, nonprofits all keep as like main pillars of their organizations.
And we've seen this happen though, that at places that do have that transparency, that do put in the work, that are very loud on the issues of teaching their students about consent and sexual assault and healthy relationships, no place is immune from experiencing harm. And so, we've seen examples of institutions and schools that harm has occurred on their campuses, even after they've put in that sort of work and they have an open and transparent or seemingly transparent community. In civil litigation, in instances like that, where a school can say, well, we've put in all of this work, we've done all of this stuff, is there still room for that sort of accountability for an institution that might, on a high level, do all the right things, but when it comes down to these intimate student-on-student interactions and harm that occurs there, they still don't know what to do and they still do the wrong thing. I'd just love to hear your opinion on that, especially when they become defensive and in denial about the fact that the harm can still occur on their campuses.
Yeah, I think I have a few responses to that. I think first off, we can't prevent every harm, and I get that. I'm an attorney. I would love to sue every institution where any harm has ever been committed, but we don't have strict liability in Pennsylvania, which would mean, it happened here and so you're at fault. We do have to prove negligence. And so there are cases where there are institutions that are not negligent and someone still gets harmed. Those instances absolutely occur. I think what happens more often, though, is that the college, the school, the institution says, "Look at our policy. It's robust. It's well thought out. It covers all of our bases. What do you mean we were reckless? Our policy is so great." And the question then becomes, sure, yeah, it's great, but what were you doing to enforce it? Who was there holding you accountable to your own policy? And so I think there's two layers, right? There's the group of individuals and campuses and institutions where they don't try, and there's not even a policy there, and of course they're held accountable. But there's also a deeper level of, well, we're trying on the surface. Look at all of our fancy. We have 5 people working in our Title IX office. We've done all these things, but that doesn't mean you weren't negligent. Because if you weren't enforcing your policies, if you weren't doing the things to investigate your students, if someone comes to you and says this guy's been reported 5 different times for harassment and then he commits an assault, you're still accountable because you're not following your own policies, or you're not taking the time to actually dig in and do the work that you need to protect students.
Yeah, I 100% agree that policy is only the half of it. It's all about implementation. And I like to draw a comparison to, on an elementary level, the girls who bullied me when I came back to school after reporting my assault, and who, months later or maybe years later were marching at the Women's March with posters saying "Believe Women." None of that window dressing or policy matters unless there's enforcement, which is such an important thing to hammer down for institutions, especially.
Yeah, I equate it to like a Chick-fil-A putting a rainbow flag out. It's not
Yes, yes.
you're not
That
doing
is
it,
so
right?
true. No, yeah. Which is so frustrating because so often, and especially in the legal landscape that we're living in right now, with the rollbacks on voting rights, it's become a space where even those policies can be seen as discriminatory. They say, well, you're discriminating against our male students. And then you say, hold on, wait a second. 1 in 6 boys are also just as likely to be sexually assaulted before the age of 18. What do you mean this is discriminatory against male students? And so I think it's really important that we keep the pressure on, especially as the legal landscape and political landscape shifts, that while the overarching policies in the country might be shifting, we can't let that slide at the school level, and at our community levels. But it is really encouraging to hear about that big legal change in Pennsylvania, and I hope that the courts continue to uphold victims' rights to sue public schools for negligence, as you say, that public school students shouldn't be protected less than students at a private institution or anywhere else.
And outside of the courtroom, our programming invites young people to see themselves as upstanders, not bystanders, in situations of harassment, coercion, or digital harm. In the cases you've handled, can you share an example of how a peer or adult stepping in, saving screenshots, reporting, or simply believing changed the trajectory of a survivor's story?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of times when a survivor comes forward, it's not their voice at first, right? It's a 12-year-old girl who told her best friend, and her best friend tells her mom, and then her mom calls the school, right? I mean, that's often how these cases get reported. And so being an ally, being a good friend, a supportive friend through something like that is paramount. I mean, especially because when someone comes forward, they are in a fragile mental state. And so it is important to have a friend there who believes you, who validates your experience, and then helps you through it. I mean, it can be the difference between life and death in some of these cases.
And so many survivors in coming forward are faced with this decision to choose between, healing and or seeking justice. And sometimes it can be conflated, between the two. That seeking justice is how you can find healing, or that, but oftentimes it's the opposite. That seeking justice can re-traumatize, trigger, re-victimize a survivor when in their sort of supposed healing journey. So how do you support your clients that are trying to do both, that are trying to heal through accountability, and at the same time, what boundaries do you encourage them to set in the legal process? And I know you've explained, your ethos earlier, which was incredible, but I'd love to hear you dive deeper into that.
Yeah. Well, first off, I would say it's not healing for everyone. It's not. It's a deeply personal decision and journey. And so for some clients, I do see, I am able to actually see that the process is healing. They get to tell their story for the first time to people that believe them. They get to have their experience and their telling of it validated in a public way that they never thought was possible. Um, but it comes with the risk of having an even more traumatizing experience of a jury hearing you and saying, "I don't believe you." And legally, that's not what they're saying, and I try to prepare them for that there's a million reasons why a jury may not find for you, and it doesn't mean they didn't believe that you went through what you went through. But they're so connected for some survivors that it doesn't matter what I say or do. And so I try to prep people very early on in the process of what it will entail. I try to be incredibly upfront and honest so that when they enter litigation, they know exactly what they're signing up for. But I can only do so much, right? Because at the end of the day, it's an experience they've never had before. And so how much can you prepare for something that you've never experienced before and have no real context for? And the context you do have may be the criminal court where it was all horrible. And so it's difficult. And that's why I try to stay in communication with my clients throughout the process to say, is this still the best thing for you? Because at the end of the day, if they don't we I work on a contingency fee, and so they are not paying me as we go. And if they ever say, I gotta tap out, maybe I need to go inpatient somewhere, maybe I need to focus on my family, maybe I need to focus on my career, whatever the case may be, they tap out, they don't owe me anything. I will take on those costs and make sure that they're not getting a bill at the end of the day because they've chosen to not move forward with their complaint. And so we try to make the system as accessible as possible for survivors with an exit plan also, so that at no point do they feel like I have to stay in this, in order to heal. Sometimes it is an either or for people, and that's okay.
Amy, your approach is so unique, from all of the attorneys I've worked with over the years. Not all attorneys will say, okay, this is too much for you. Do you want to tap out? Like you said, there's a lot of attorneys that, there is some pressure applied because they want to have that, payday at the end of it. And so I just want to thank you for doing that and for always keeping the survivor center in your work and, really thinking about how they are and what they really need, because that's one of the reasons why I'm always 100% confident anytime that I have a survivor reach out to me looking for legal representation, in PA where you practice. I'm always so comfortable sending them your way because I know that is how you approach it, your representation of survivors, and because I've seen it firsthand. So I just want to take a moment to thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. I wouldn't do this work any other way. I don't think I could.
Yeah, 100%. And I know that. So you may partner early and are leading significant sex abuse litigation in PA, including cases that are breaking new legal ground. What has it been like for you building your career in this field as a woman and a member of the LGBTQ community? How does your lived experience influence the way you show up for survivors? Fair.
Yeah, I did make partner early. I had a pretty strong advocate for me in that journey. And I think, I think it helps. I'm wearing a suit today for this interview, but most days I'm wearing a t-shirt and my tattoos are out and my nose is pierced and like I don't look like an attorney when you meet me. And I think that helps actually. I think being a member of the LGBTQ community helps too because there's this already kind of understanding between me and the clients that we've been through something, right? There's this establishment that we've both undergone some sort of trauma or feeling other or feeling different or uh, you know, uh lonely sometimes, right? In that experience. And so I think it helps me gain trust quickly with a lot of clients. I think my age probably does too. I think being a woman probably does too in a lot of circumstances. Um, and so it's allowed me to build relationships, I think, in ways that some other attorneys may just not have access to. Um, it also helps that I work at a firm, but I'm pretty independent in that firm. And so I have the flexibility to work hours that I want to work, meet clients where and when I want to meet them, present how I want to present. And so it gives me the ability to be myself with clients in a way that I never thought was possible as a member of the LGBTQ community and as a young woman in the legal field. I always thought I'm going to have to hide some parts of myself to be successful. And I think doing this work in this community, I can be fully myself and also provide the best representation I can to clients in a way that we both feel very connected and honest with each other.
And shifting our focus here a little bit, when you think about the future, 10 or 20 years from now, what would a safer, more just world for survivors of sexual abuse and exploitation look like to you? And how do you see our upstream education at I Have the Right To working alongside your litigation to get us there?
Yeah, I think it's something we touched upon earlier, which is shifting that focus of how do we prevent abuse and taking the onus away from the victim and placing it on the perpetrators and educating people before they become perpetrators. Um, I think it's also some mental health awareness. I mean, I strongly believe that if a child is a perpetrator of abuse, they've been perpetrated by abuse 99% of the time. A child doesn't, it's a learned behavior. And so we get to the root of that and we get into communities and families and find where the adult abuse is occurring that leads to child on child abuse and trying to prevent that before it happens. I also think in 10 years, I think one of the key changes that needs to be made for survivors is police conduct. I think that there has to be a huge amount of relearning, retraining, re-educating the police on how they approach survivors. We've seen it happen in the medical field. We've seen SANE nurses come to the front of the lines and change how we approach survivors from a medical standpoint. And so there's no reason to believe that we can't do it in the police except for resistance, right? That's the only thing that can stop us is the police resistance itself. And so I think that that is absolutely paramount to changing the landscape for survivors over the next decades.
It's one of the elements of my story that I feel like changed the course of my life was the fact that the detective who did my interview at the Child Advocacy Center had just come back from a training about how to do trauma-informed questioning. And she, like you said, just sat there and let me speak, just let me ramble, let my mind wander, just share anything that I remembered for like 3 hours. I still remember looking at a clock and feeling like, whoa, how did that just pass so quickly? Because it was such a comfortable, I mean, as comfortable as it could be when you're sitting in a room with like a hidden camera displaying you to a room full of attorneys. Um, but yeah, that is so extremely important to train the people who are going to be those sort of first responders to survivors of sexual assault, because we do know that the way that a survivor is responded to the first time that they disclose severely impacts their journey going forward. And so with all of this being said, all of the topics we've talked about today, it's obvious, this work requires you to hold some pretty heavy stories and big feelings and horrific and tragic crimes in these sort of very high stakes environments. So I'd love to ask you in a way that is not reductive about self-care, but how do you take care of yourself on a day-to-day basis so that you can continue to show up for your clients in a sustainable way?
Yeah. When I figure that out, I'll let you know, Jesse. I'm just
Yeah.
kidding. I go to therapy regularly. I luckily have an incredible wife who supports me every day in every emotional way possible. Um, I have been blessed with the ability to um, really segment my day and my brain. So I naturally am able to kind of shut off work when I'm not working, which is really helpful. Uh, I like to say that, like, I'm empathetic without taking on other people's emotions as best as I can. Of course, there are days where all of this is not true. And, I'll just cry for 3 hours. But for the most part, I try to focus on the work part of it. And a lot of times after talking to a client, what I feel is anger. And how I use that anger is towards the defense counsel to write another motion, to write more discovery requests, to hold them to deadlines, to push cases forward as quickly and as aggressively as I can, because I know that my client wants to get through this. And I also know that there's an expiration date on that, because if it takes 5 years, no one wants that. No one wants to be going through this continuously, endlessly, without, light at the end of the tunnel. And so I try to use those emotions to channel them into work more efficiently, be more aggressive. I'm not an aggressive person by nature, and so I use it to try and fuel me to go after defense attorneys in ways that don't necessarily come naturally to me.
So, as we wrap up, there's two questions that we like to ask at the end. So, the first is, what is giving you hope?
That's a hard question in this political climate. I think the younger generation. Especially as a member of the LGBTQ community, I grew up in a small town in West Virginia. There was never a day where I thought I should come out in high school. I should be open about who I am. That never even crossed my mind. And, I have an 18-year-old stepdaughter who goes to school in Pittsburgh, and like everyone at her school is queer. Like, it's just the younger generation are so open and so accepting in a way that even, as a millennial, we couldn't reach when I was growing up. And so I think that probably gives me more hope than anything else right now.
And we also love to ask all of our guests to complete their own I have the right to statement at the end of all of our episodes. And so I'd love to ask you, what does your I have the right to statement look like today?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a longer answer than you probably wanted. I think that there is this misconception about civil law in America. I think we have been conditioned to believe that people are ambulance chasers if they go after what is necessary. I think we've been conditioned to believe that companies should not be held accountable for their bad acts. And so half of my calls start with, I'm not a person who would sue someone, but this happened to me. And it's like, everyone is the right to sue people when harm has been done to them intentionally or negligently. And so I would say I have the right to exercise my rights under all circumstances.
I love that. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. So, as we close today's conversation, we're holding so much gratitude for Amy, for her courage in standing with survivors, and for offering them a path to justice. Her work reminds us that accountability and healing can exist side by side, and that the law, when practiced with compassion, can be a powerful tool for both.
Hearing Amy talk about her clients and cases is a powerful reminder that when people are believed and supported and cared for, their voices can change institutions and culture. Whether you're a survivor, a parent, an educator, or an advocate, we hope this episode encourages you to think differently about how we can respond to harm, how we talk about consent and healthy relationships, and how we can all be part of preventing violence before it happens.
If this conversation resonated with you, we invite you to share it. Keep talking about what you heard today and support survivor-centered, trauma-informed work like Amy's and our programming at I Have the Right To.
And if you're looking for ways to bring these conversations into your school or community, I Have the Right To partners with K-12 schools, colleges, and universities to provide trauma-informed programming on consent, healthy relationships, and leadership. You can reach us at takeaction@ihavetheright2.org. Thank you for being a part of the Aspire community, for listening, learning, and showing up for a world where everyone has the right to safety, dignity, and voice. Until next time, keep aspiring towards change, and remember, you have the right to be heard.
Thank you so much for listening. Like and subscribe to the podcast on all platforms. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends about Aspire. Follow us on social media at I Have the Right To. Learn more about workshops and programming available for students, educators, parents, and community members at ihavetheright2.org.